From 4 hours ago 10:29 full story. Inflation hits 7% in March as Britain's cost of living soars. Richard Partington households in Britain have come under renewed pressure from the soaring cost of living after the official inflation rate reached 7% last month amid a record increase in petrol and diesel prices. Figures from the Office for National Statistics showed the latest rise in the Consumer Prices Index was the fastest in 3 decades, coming a month after the barometer for rising living costs jumped by 6.2% in February. With broad-based price rises across the economy, the biggest increase came in the cost of filling up at the pump after Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent the global oil price close to record levels amid concerns over supply disruption and sanctions. UK inflation average petrol and diesel prices soared to record highs of 160.2p and 170.5p a litre respectively, rising by more than 30% over the past year, the biggest annual increase since 1989. Restaurants and hotel prices also rose steeply in March, having been unavailable last year during lockdown, while there were also rises across a number of different types of food as the cost of a weekly shop increases. Here's the full story. Inflation hits 7% in March as Britain's cost of living soars. Updated at 10:35 BST. 20 minutes ago 14:11 Germany would face a sharp recession if gas supplies from Russia are suddenly cut off, the country's leading economic institutes warned today. A sudden stop in Russian energy supplies would slow economic growth to 1.9% this year and lead to a contraction of 2.2% in 2023, 5 of Germany's top economic research institutes warned. Stefan Kufs, vice president of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, said it would knock out €220 billion of growth. If gas supplies were to be cut off, the German economy would undergo a sharp recession. You can also calculate it like this: Germany would forfeit €220 billion in economic output in 2022 and 2023, which is equivalent to 6.5% of GDP. The institutes also cut their baseline 2022 growth projection for the economy to 2.7% from 4.8%, and forecast 2023 growth of 3.1%. Berlin has been resisting pressure to immediately stop Russian energy imports, following the Ukraine war. The FT says, the new forecast released on Wednesday was more pessimistic than most earlier economic studies and could give cover for Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government to push back against calls for an immediate ban on Russian oil and gas imports, on which Germany is heavily reliant. 30 minutes ago 14:01 US producer price inflation has hit a record high, as American manufacturers and services companies continue to lift their prices sharply. The US producer prices index rose 11.2% over the last year in March, the fastest increase since the data was first calculated in November 2010. Good prices rose 2.3% in March alone, driven by a 5.7% increase in energy products, with diesel and home heating oil both up by a fifth in the month. The Bureau of Labor Statistics explains, leading the March increase in the index for final demand goods, diesel fuel prices jumped 20.4%. The indexes for gasoline, fresh and dry vegetables, jet fuel, iron and steel scrap, and electric power also moved higher. US producer prices rose 11.2% from a year ago in March. The biggest gain on record. USA PPI economy inflation interest dollar stock market ADFC 0 CDG up K4 ADFC futures forex April 13, 2022. These producer prices will feed into consumer inflation, keeping the cost of living pressure high. 1 hour ago 13:14 rising interest rates are also weighing on the US housing market. Mortgage applications to purchase a home rose 1% last week, but were 6% lower than the same week 1 year ago. With borrowing costs up, applications to refinance a home loan fell 5% week on week, and were 62% lower than a year ago. Mortgage applications continue to run at low levels as mortgage rates climb. TPS /TJ2 KSDUK 80H9 MGOC SIN Mike Zaccardi, CFA, CMT April 13, 2022 mortgage rate versus applications not looking great. Worth watching housing starts and lumber with some of these recent housing market developments. JLOVDP 74ND Arno Venter April 13, 2022. 2 hours ago 12:54 JP Morgan takes $524 hit from Russia, sets aside $900 million over inflation and Ukraine. Wall Street banking giant JP Morgan has set aside around $900 million to cover potential losses from high inflation and the Ukraine war. In its first quarter results, JP Morgan reported a 42% drop in net income to $8.28 billion, below forecasts, as deal-making slowed following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The figures also show a $524 million hit from the market fallout caused by the Ukraine conflict. JP Morgan says was caused by funding spread widening and credit valuation adjustments, relating to increases in commodities exposures and markdowns of derivatives receivables from Russia-associated counterparties. Chief Executive Jamie Dimon struck a cautious note, saying, "We remain optimistic on the economy, at least for the short term. Consumer and business balance sheets as well as consumer spending remain at healthy levels, but see significant geopolitical and economic challenges ahead due to high inflation, supply chain issues and the war in Ukraine." JP Morgan said its provision for credit losses was $1.5 billion, reflecting a net reserve build of $902 million driven by increasing the probability of downside risks due to high inflation and the war in Ukraine, as well as accounting for Russia-associated exposure in CIB, corporate and investment banking, and AWM, asset and wealth management, and $582 million of net charge-off. Update: JP Morgan Chase reported Wednesday that quarterly earnings tumbled as the banking giant set aside $902 million for bad loans, citing downside risks including the Ukraine war and surging inflation. 01LL5 SOIMI AFP News Agency April 13, 2022. Dimon added that JP Morgan had helped governments to implement economic sanctions of unprecedented complexity during the last quarter. "While our company will continue to deal with this global turmoil, our hearts go out to the extreme suffering of the Ukrainian people and to all of those affected by the war." JP Morgan's first quarter results are marred by a $524 million loss tied to market fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. https://t/CZR/6GW9T Bloomberg Markets April 13, 2022. Updated at 14.27 BST. 2 hours ago 12:09 Larry Elliott, stagflation looks a racing certainty as worse to come for UK households. High inflation is going to stick around for a while, our economics editor Larry Elliott warns, meaning the UK is likely to suffer stagflation, or even recession. While in the summer there should be some reduction in the annual rate, there is likely to be another rise in the autumn when the energy price cap is again adjusted. Inflation will remain at 7% or above for the rest of 2022. The strength and persistence of inflation creates economic and political problems for the government. Stagflation, a toxic combination of stagnant output and rising inflation, is a racing certainty, but there is also a risk of an intensifying squeeze on living standards caused by prices rising faster than wages, driving the economy into recession. Stagflation looks a racing certainty as worse to come for UK households, Larry Elliott. For hours ago 11 o'clock effects of economic sanctions on Russia starting to be felt. Liquid fuel prices have more than doubled over the last year, up 113.9%, driving up costs for families who rely on oil to heat their homes. With motor fuel up 30%, and raw material prices paid by manufacturers surging, March's inflation data is revealing the economic impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing sanctions. Jonas Keck, economist at the CEBR, says, whilst the UK is less dependent on Russian energy imports than other European countries, changes in world demand still feed through to British prices. This can already be seen in the March figures, highlighted by the surging price of liquid fuels. Keck also warns that the cost of living crisis will worsen, as real regular pay isn't keeping up with price growth, and Chancellor Rishi Sunak's fiscal support package fell short of expectations. For hours ago 10:41 Mark Sweeney Tesco doubled pre-tax profits to more than £2 billion last year, but has warned on profits for this year as it faces a battle to keep the cost of the weekly shop in check amid soaring inflation driving up costs and squeezing household budgets. Total revenues for the UK's biggest supermarket, which proved to be a pandemic winner by taking a share from rivals and boosting online sales, rose by 6% to